What's the point of came to actually it's been so long since I've been to lunch with we all might be moderating.
Usually, Brad, we start because people only have so much patience with anything. So I think it's just I think we are. Is that okay? How are you?
I'll get out much.
We're all shy on set.
That's really unusual. It's a pretty shy group.
Is this one that we're sitting in front?
It is.
You guys are so patient. We're kind of
Do you want to do that or do you want to?
I know, isn't that feel good?
So you want to do that? Okay.
yeah. We're gonna talk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I'm gonna.
Wow, I feel like we're massive. I'm allowed to talk extra info. That's nice. It sounds like
Okay. I think we'll just get started since, why not? Thank you all for coming. I'm Jeff Busher. I'm this year's NIRI Seattle chapter president, and we're really happy to see you all here today. We also want to be sure to thank our sponsors, which include currently K&L Gates, IPRIO, Q4 Web Systems, Broadridge, Business Wire, and Wilson Sonsini. A couple things before we get started. Our next NIRI event is a NIRI on the Rocks social gathering. These are a lot of fun, as Randall will tell you. And it's on Thursday, October 30th, day before Thanksgiving. It's going to be at the Roanoke Tavern out on Mercer Island. And then we're thinking of doing our holiday party a little bit earlier this year than in other years because it's another compressed holiday season. So the plan is to do it before Thanksgiving on November 20th in downtown Seattle. So look in your email and on our website for information about these events that are upcoming. And lastly, if you're not a member of NIRI Seattle, that's okay, but we'd love to have you. There's information on our website, and just, really, we're trying to grow the group, and we'd love to have you. So, our panel on big data today will be moderated by Brad Ogura, Vice President and Vice President of Marketing and Investor Relations at Puget Sound Bank. Brad's been around the IR community here in Seattle for a very long time, very well respected, and we're very, very grateful to have him. He was also chapter president of NIRI Seattle in 1995 and 1996. And he's presented at many of these many local NIRI events as well as NIRI national events. So very well seasoned, and he's also moderated quite a few panels. So we're very, very grateful to have him here today. So we're also very fortunate to have three distinguished panelists this afternoon, all of whom flew in for this event. So we provided good weather for them, to the disappointment of some, but we have all the way over on the left, we have Rupert Spiegelberg, CEO of Investis, and his work as head of product. Rupert has focused on the conception and development of Investis' drive into big data with the audience intelligence program that allows companies to understand which person or which pension or hedge fund, activist, shareholder, or other party is coming to the website and what they're doing there. So we look forward to hearing more about that. All the way on my right here, we have David Levine, Head of Investor Relations Analytics at NASDAQ Corporate Services. David leads the ownership analytics team, which supports corporate management's understanding of institutional investor and market activity. He also leads NASDAQ Corporate Services thought leadership efforts in this area, publishing reports on NASDAQ's market site, insight page, and interacting with the financial news community. And then in the middle, we thought we'd put the woman in the middle to balance it a little bit. We have Michelle Jackson, Vice President of Business Development and Strategy with Broadridge Financial Solutions. Michelle is responsible for leading data initiatives, creating data-related services, and uncovering new revenue opportunities for Broadridge's $1.6 billion investor communications business. She drives innovation at Broadridge by identifying data assets, investigating market opportunities, and devising market entry strategies, and designing delivery roadmaps. And with that, I would like to turn the panel over to Brad. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So I just want to highlight the work that Randall Hopkins of NASDAQ over here and Jeff Busher have done in the past year or so in terms of putting together some very fantastic programs. We had SEC Disclosure, a great program at KL Gates last month. We had Edelman, PR, what was it?
Trust barometer.
Thank you, thank you. You know, a great program in terms of different venues and content that we haven't had in a while, and I know it takes a lot of work, so hats off to Randall and Jeff, and we have, how many board members do we have? We have Deanna, is that, besides Randall and Jeff, so just a little shout out to those guys. Making that possible. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do is just, with our esteemed panelists, is just very short overview of what you're doing with big data, how it relates to issuers, investor relations, creating shareholder value. And I know it's a lot to cover in just a few minutes, but we'll give each of you that short time. I'll open up with a few questions, and it's sort of like the dating game in terms of each question that I have might go to all three or one or two of them, and then hopefully we have lots of questions from the group today. So as our panelists go through their presentations and I open with some opening questions, I'd like all of you to be thinking of questions on how it relates to what you're doing, your company, questions in general about big data and what it is, how it can benefit what you're doing. And then at the end, Jeff will probably have a few concluding comments, and we'll get you out of here in a timely manner. So Rupert, I'll have you start with an overview of what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Brad, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everyone, for inviting me to speak today. Probably, a good place to start, because big data is quite a sort of amorphous proposition and means quite a lot of different things to different people. So maybe I might sort of explain where I am, where Investis is coming at it from, and that maybe can sort of frame my answers as we go forward today. Investis, to those of you who do or do not know us, is we describe ourselves as the world's second largest platform for corporate communications and investor relations professionals for listed companies. Second to my esteemed colleague on my right.
That's the real reason I'm in it. I think that's the real reason I'm in it.
Maybe that's the case. And what we have is a platform that allows listed companies to host and manage their corporate websites and their investor relations websites, and also their apps and social media programs, all on a single platform. And so now we've been in business for about 14 years, and we work for about 2,000 companies globally. What that has meant is about sort of 2 or 3 years ago, we suddenly realised actually that to a large extent now we're very much at the centre in terms of our platform of what we were at a sort of a size that was big enough that we could see that we were at the centre of what the sort of the investment world was doing across a very large number of listed companies. But we weren't capturing any of that data. We weren't helping our clients understand that data. And so we decided to change that and actually sort of flip the platform on its head slightly and say, actually, joining the platform gives you access to this incredible amount of data, not only what's going on within your digital environment, and across multiple environments, such as not just your website, but also apps and social media platforms. And actually, you could start to use your digital presence as a means of intelligence, of surveillance, of investor targeting. In order to do that, what we did was that we took all the data points of people who were coming to the platform. There's over 500,000 different investors and companies and governmental organisations and educational organisations and so forth. And we started building a database where we could identify exactly which companies were doing what across the digital space. So we have about 15 million visitors across our clients' entire web estate every single month. So we're now getting a fantastic sample and understanding of what the community is doing. So that's really where we come from the point of view of big data, is saying, right, now we've got a sort of honeypot in terms of, we've got an area where people are coming and we can understand their behavior. Now, how do we use that data? How do we use that information to benefit, to help our clients, the investor relations officers and corporate communications officers of listed companies to do their job better? And I think that is going to really sort of run along the lines of sort of two principles. One is how does it make their day more efficient, and two is how does it help them sort of see into the future, actually, which is, in my view, really what the whole big data story, not just in investor relations but more broadly in the world, is all about. Because it's, if you look at retailers, like Costco or Target or Walmart, they're all crunching huge amounts of data because they want to improve the efficiency of the business and their inventories and their consumer targeting, and they want to look into the future to see where the trends are and so forth. And I think when you take that principle back into the investor relations world, that's kind of what the investor relations community should be doing with big data, which is understanding what their target audience, what the investors are doing on their website, and how it can make their jobs more efficient. And I will a little bit later talk a little bit about sort of some really good case studies of how companies are using this data to improve their investor relations programs. And then secondly is peering into the future to understand, what could happen in the future by understanding what is happening today within their digital web presence. And that's, I'm suddenly listening to myself, and that sounds rather sort of weird and dark, but I might explain it a bit as we go through it a bit later.
Thank you very much. Your introduction, just for me, brought up a whole lot of questions. You're talking about what you're doing in general, and so some of the questions, just to prompt you later, that I'll be asking are, really what are some of the very specific things that you're doing to help, for example, investor relations officers understand the shareholders better? What is the insight? What are examples of that? So
I'll give some examples later. Yeah.
So, and as well, I hope that everyone out here has those kind of questions as well, because what's going to make this format work very well is it's not this presentation, but it's these questions that you want to know. So
exactly. I could go on, but yeah. I don't want the sound of my own voice to pervade the audience too much.
So we'll go this way. And Michelle, a few opening remarks.
Great. So I think Rupert actually gave us a nice framework to start the conversation. It's, having spent most of my career working on data and digital initiatives, I think the buzzword, the phrase big data does a lot to sort of engage more people in the conversation. But particularly in the spaces we all operate, there's always been a lot of data over the past couple of decades, and now we just have the tools to better deal with it. Cheaper compute power, cheaper storage, the ability to churn through massive amounts of data. So from a Broadridge perspective, we're sort of this strong B2B brand that you don't often hear about, but we facilitate all of the conversations that occur between the issuer, the issuing company of the security, the investors at the end of the day, and we have really tremendous relationships to facilitate, trading activity and communications activity with banks, brokers, issuers, and institutions around the globe. I work specifically with companies in North America, primarily in the U.S., and one of the things we'll probably get into in deeper detail today is over the past 18 months, we've seen a really tremendous push from the companies we work with to say, we need more data. And it's been very interesting to watch, and we'll probably all up here at the table today hypothesize on sort of what's pushing this, but when we look at corporate issuers in the U.S., we can all agree there's been a real significant change in the landscape from regulatory, industry trends, and sort of our own personal expectations of what data should be available to us. And so we've really done a tremendous amount of work over the past year and a half to start to bring data sets out to the industry in ways that allow us to balance data privacy of individual account owners, but still bring transparency to companies. So trying to sort of lift the veil on understanding things like retail ownership, which traditionally most companies, when I sit down with people in the corporate governance and IRO space, they say, it's been a black box for a long time, and maybe up until 3 or 4 years ago, we were okay with that blind spot. But given changing circumstances, people now need a way to be able to get some more visibility and, no pun intended, make some more data-based decisions about how to engage with shareholders on a broader scale. So I think as we have our discussion today, I can share with you some really interesting things that companies are doing already here in the U.S. to understand their retail shareholder base. Some really interesting trends that we're watching move at having been in this particular space for several years now, I'm really fascinated by the speed at which this trend is moving. I think that's probably my biggest point I would call out today, but really interesting things that are happening at sort of the head of this with brands that have strong retail recognition, or brands that are very consumer focused, and we'll be able to give some examples of what some of those companies are doing to engage with their shareholder base, get their retail shareholders to be more active, and what that's doing for those organizations in terms of their corporate governance and IR outreach.
It's terrific. Again, you're setting the stage for some great questions, and I'm looking forward to answering my questions. I'm from a micro-cap financial services company. We have as large as Microsoft here, and sort of in between everything down to OTC bulletin board stock. So you're going to get some questions that kind of run that gamut of, look, how can you, what are your solutions for a company like mine, whether that's large cap or micro cap, and how might I even approach doing some of those points, the questions that you seek to answer. So thanks, Michelle.
Perfect.
David?
Well, thank you for both setting me up to talk. So I'm from NASDAQ Corporate Solutions. As many of you know, NASDAQ purchased the corporate solutions business from Thomson Reuters. We are in the middle of building out a next-gen platform, and all these issues of big data are a really big issue for us. What we found, as Michelle mentioned, the data's always been there. It's not like it just exploded in the last few years. What's changed is actually the technology. I think that has made it possible to do things that we just couldn't do before. I call it the mother of all joins problem that we had, where we knew that putting A and B and C together was great, but you just couldn't do it. It would blow up your machine.
I think your DBA would chase you down at that point.
That's right. There would be blood on the floor. But it changed, and now it can be done. So now that that's been solved, the problem that's emerged is not the hardware; it's what you do with it all. We have, we provide an end-to-end solution in the investor relations space and beyond. Through our listing business, we deal with corporate governance. In the investor relations space, we do ownership analysis, targeting, webcasting, web hosting. And that generates a lot of data that is really important. So we actually started a few years back with ownership content, building some big data analytics around it. And now with our next gen, we're really looking at bringing all these content sets that create lots of touch points, that create machine data of who logged in, who listened to your webcast, who visited your website, resolving IP addresses, looking at who's clicked through, is going to be able to generate, we believe, analytics that can really help basically take big data and make it small, right? Because if data doesn't tell a story that helps investor relations officers do their job, it doesn't matter. So our big push is to really think of how we do it, and because Microsoft is here, I will mention that we are actually in the middle of a POC with your business intelligence Power Pivot things, looking at leveraging it across our platforms to actually do, do the things that I'm talking about. So, that's really where we're focused. Is we have all this content, and we have historical data, cross-sectional data. How do we make it useful in a way that can answer questions? How do we bring together all this information we're collecting to help? And that's what we're focused on right now, and I can talk more about that.
So again, you guys need to be formulating questions. Some of the questions that I have are centered around how are you making this idea of big data, translate that to helping investor relations officers work with board management, executives, build in shareholder value. And that's a pretty broad question, but it kind of leads over to, what are some specific examples that don't necessarily have to require 10 minutes to set up what you've got, but kind of fast forward to, it's kind of like, well, what can you do for me and my company and the value of the company? So I'm going to we'll kind of start with David and go in the reverse order. And I'm interested in hearing, what is a specific example of how you've worked with a company to build shareholder value? That's a pretty broad question, and I'll let you decide how you want to answer that.
So I'll start by talking about we have our platform today, and our platform in the future is a contact management tool that our clients can use to enter interactions, meetings. On top of it, we've built a meetings analytics tool or reporting capabilities that bring out the content into a report, and that's really something that it already exists. The sort of the next gen of that is connecting all of the content to other content and in a dashboard. So a dashboard is sort of the format that we're going to be using to really address the question of how do I give something to a client that they don't have to, there's no explanation involved, there's no teaching, there's no, just quick, get up to speed, get running, go fast. That is where we're focused on. Another place I mentioned, we started out looking at public ownership information. We built a back-tested targeting model that
because you have the Thomson Reuters.
Yes,
right. Because I've used that, and I think others in the room have used it. So that's all being combined and brought up.
So we're taking the best of the technology and the content that we had in Thomson 1, and we're bringing it to a next-gen platform that we're building right now with Microsoft's help through and through, from top to bottom, and we will be rolling that out starting next year.
Okay.
And so I come from Thomson Reuters, that's my background, and our product right now is Thomson 1 with all this content.
Thank you. Michelle.
Great. So I'll talk a little bit about one company we started engaging with this past proxy season. And it's kind of an extreme example, but I think it tells it really clearly. A technology organization here on the West Coast has one of the largest retail shareholder bases of all U.S. public companies, a little over 2 million. And like most organizations, a really robust connection between their corporate governance group, corporate secretary, and the IRO. They even have a group within their investor relations team that tends to focus on retail shareholders. And it was very interesting as we started to work with them and provide some visibility into their data. This is an organization that has tremendous institutional tools to look at, their top 10 or 20 investors. They're probably on a regular basis looking at about their top 200 or 300 institutional holders in real depth. And as we started working with them, they were very interested in understanding their retail base. They had, what originally drove the conversation was a real painful experience over the past 3 years on Say on Pay. I hope none of you experienced this, but we know from benchmarking about a third of the market goes from having a great response on Say on Pay 1 year to a subpar response the following year, and this roller coaster ride happens to several hundred companies every year. They were unfortunately one of those. And so by providing some analytics that allow them to look at this couple million retail shareholders in their shareholder base, we're able to give them aggregated profiled information. So again, there's always this delicate balance in retail ownership, keeping the individual Michelle Jackson masked. We're able to give them, here are the shareholders that have held your stock over a certain period of time. Here are the ones who are active and typically vote. We can look at them by size, delivery
This is for
preference. For retail shareholders, including OBOs. Because we're never disclosing
including OBOs.
Including OBOs. We're never disclosing a name. And this is where the connection to big data becomes important. So to David's point, and Rupert mentioned it as well, when you get to the point where you can churn through billions of records very quickly and very efficiently and do the analytics required to create profiled segments or cohorts, it really changes the game. If we tried to do this 10 years ago with the tools that were available, it would have been prohibitively expensive, and we couldn't have done what we want to do today. So this is really a combination of compute power and analytics capabilities and cheap storage that allow us to do this sort of analytics. And at the end of the day, what it meant to this organization is, they took this huge pool of several million retail shareholders and were able to find pockets, 3 pockets in particular, that a total of about 5,000 of their retail accounts that held almost 10% of their total outstanding shares. I'll let that sink in for a minute.
Wow.
Retail shareholders, out of this pool of several million, these couple of thousand own 10% of total outstanding shares. And so for this combined corporate governance and IR team, the message was now, if we look at this small group of retail shareholders that we've never been able to really communicate with before, treat them as sort of a block, they now became sort of a page 2 institutional holder, right? So what we enabled the company to do was take existing assets that they were using in their IR programs, webinar content, filed public content, and facilitate the delivery to this targeted group of retail shareholders. Never had to disclose who they were, never showed my name and address, but by providing that profiled aggregated data that allowed them to make important business decisions about the relative value of communication, help them make it in a way that was economical, they were able to do some proactive outreach to these shareholders in advance of their annual meeting, just like they typically do with their institutional segment. And we worked with them to actually monitor the behavior of this group of shareholders throughout their proxy. And what we found is they participated at higher rates than other retail shareholders, and they voted more favorably with management than other retail shareholders. So for this organization, it was a real success story in terms of, generating some real transparency, a look into that retail base, and being able to really take what we often talk about in the industry as shareholder engagement, which I think honestly means we're working with our largest institutions and in a very economical fashion, expanding that and really going above and beyond.
That's terrific. Thanks, Michelle. I love that example of something that I think as issuers we've all kind of struggled with in terms of how those individual shareholders are voting, the OVOs, and identifying them and not feeling stuck when you come up against that wall of, here's the OVO list and there's nothing you can do with them. So Rupert, that's a kind of tall piece to follow, but I'll let you.
Well, I would, to answer your question, how are we using big data to sort of help our clients, investor relations?
So I'm looking for a specific example.
Yes, I'm going to give you one.
Okay.
Is that we're helping them get a seat at the board, in the boardroom. And if you remember what I said earlier, was that there's sort of 2 elements to it. I see it's 2 elements. There's one that sort of makes your life more efficient, makes you do your job better, and there's this part of it that you can use big data to sort of predict the future. And so if I look at some of the examples of how some of our clients are using what we call audience intelligence, which is our big data program, which we've launched only 4 months ago. So we're still actually learning how companies are using this data and how they're using it as part of their IR program. But one of our clients is a sort of big global, actually I think it's either the biggest or one of the biggest global steel makers in the world, are using audience intelligence to, what they've done is they've identified 55 different activist shareholders, as well, and on top of that, they various law firms that they know act for certain PE houses and other shareholders. And what they're using audience intelligence for is to identify, is to look on a daily basis if and when those shareholders, those companies are coming into their website, what they're doing, what they're looking for. So they can give the board, the CEO or the CFO, heads up as to whether certain people are generating, have a certain interest. And not only can they tell them whether they've got a certain interest in
Can't
the
hear
company.
you, audio.
Can't hear you very
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. Not only can they tell the board which active shareholders have been looking at their digital estate, whether it's their corporate site, their IR site, their social media, and so forth. But actually, they can tell them what they've been looking at and how frequently, and on top of that, what search terms they've been looking for. So it's been absolutely fascinating, the kind of information that they can bring up, and it brings up a huge amount of very sort of surprising data in terms of the kind of things. It's a bit, effectively what we're selling here is a cloak of invisibility. We're giving you the ability to go to your own birthday party where everyone's talking about you, but they don't know that you're there, but you are there and you're listening in to what they're saying. So and of course people tell the truth when you're not there, right? And you get the real answers. So the kind of data that it's springing up is really powerful and absolutely fascinating. It allows them to see information that they wouldn't, that they don't know until after it's happened normally. So when I showed this to, we showed this to eBay a few months back, and the IRO looked at it and just said, "God, I wish I'd had this 6 months earlier." And I could have told my CFO that Carl Icahn was sniffing around, and maybe we could have done something. I can't tell you why Carl Icahn's looking at your website, but I can tell you though that he is, or his people within his company are, and I can tell you what they're looking at. But you can start putting the dots together from that. So that's one example. Another example is one of our clients was actually being prosecuted by a bunch of funds, and what they used audience intelligence for was to track what those funds were doing on the website and what information they were downloading. And so again, that helped them in the defence during that audience. And so that's sort of looking into the future in terms of how people are using it to sort of make their days more efficient or improve investor targeting, for example, is quite a good way. You can sort of, quite often one hears within the investor relations community is that you do these roadshows. They get set up by corporate access teams in various banks, and there's always a little bit of a sort of jar about whether it's the bank's clients that they want to put in front of or the people that you really want to see. And you can start before and after your roadshows. You can actually start to understand who are the people. Have they been in to your website to do their research prior to the meeting? Have they gone in afterwards? People that haven't gone in prior, maybe they're just not that interested in your company as perhaps the corporate access team would like you to believe. So you can start sort of improving your investor targeting. Also, if you're doing roadshows in particular sort of cities or you're looking at types of funds, you can understand whether those kind of funds are actually taking an interest in your company prior to that.
So I'm going to ask Rupert and Michelle a question about privacy, and then I want to follow up with David on an issue or a company approaching a project and efficient ways to get started, manage it, and might follow up with Rupert and Michelle and Faye thoughts. But I'm curious, we talked about the obos and we talked about the behavior on websites. What I'd like is each of you to just touch upon privacy issues and how you're working around that and sort of balancing that act of giving a company information but respecting the privacy of those who are that we're looking at.
Sure. So I'm going to do a slightly political thing, and before I answer that, getting on to Rupert's comment, because the comment about road shows is we've had a lot of companies reach out to us as we went into market with the product, asking specifically that question for retail holders, both from U.S. public companies and with ADRs. So it's interesting to see it both on the institutional, and we didn't expect the kind of interest on the retail side that we've observed. So I just mentioned that. Data privacy, I'll give you the sort of the lay of the land. At Broadridge, we think of ourselves as having to be responsible stewards of the data, and it's for the past 25 years we've been handling data feeds from several thousand companies on a nightly basis. So this is definitely not anything new for us. And to give you a glimpse into our process, when we look at bringing new data sets into production, whether they're for a product that's, helps print and mail, or deliver emails, or whether it's something in our data analytics products, we have two considerations that we go through. And the first is this technologically feasible? And then the second track is, what does this mean from a data stewardship and governance perspective? And I think having those two things happen simultaneously is really important. So I'll get on my soapbox for just a moment. I think with big data comes big responsibility, and we can talk about data privacy at one level, but as you start to think about what's happening in the world around us, both in our professional and personal lives, sort of the ethics of big data actually become a much bigger question. So those are the trade-offs in terms of the aggregation of personal data beyond just one particular data set, and what does it mean in terms of the value to the individual, the risk profile of the individual. So, for example, if someone thought for a moment about Michelle Jackson, the data available to me, it's not just my investor information and my credit card, my mortgage information, but this is about passive data collection. This is about, where my Easy Pass tracks me when I drive through a toll booth, and the GPS on my phone for app usage, and all those ULISA agreements that we all click through and never read. If over time those things get connected, that's an extraordinarily clear picture of Michelle Jackson and where she's traveled and where she lives and who her family is. So we think about data in those two perspectives every time we take something to market. And to pull back for just a moment to the specific products and services I'm talking about today, it's really important that we keep sort of all the players in the ecosystem that we work in at Broadridge in alignment. So one of the biggest tests for the things that we do in market is it good for everyone involved? And if the answer to that is yes, you can be pretty confident you've landed in the right space. So as we bring, for example, these data sets out to the industry, is it good for the corporation? Does it provide them a responsible view with additional transparency? Yes. Is this good for the investor? Are we able to apply their preferences but maintain their privacy to give them a better experience? And the answer we're getting in market is yes. And for the intermediaries between that, the brokers, the institutions, the banks, is this a positive outcome for them? And the answer we're getting there is yes. And so those are some of the things that are really important to us, and part of the reason that in the development of some of these products that I'll talk about today, we talk about aggregated profiled information, particularly around the retail base, where that OBO designation is a clear indication from the individual, I don't want my name and address used. And I will share, it was a very interesting phenomena as I talked to companies during the cycle of developing this product. I would always ask companies, if you could have anything in the world around proxy, what would you want? And the first question was, I don't want to have to do them. And then, okay, all right, that being aside, if you could have anything to make your life easier, what would it be? And universally, micro cap to large cap, every company would say, I want the name, address, phone number of every shareholder. And after we kind of joked about the OBO thing, I would usually ask, okay, but let's say I could give that to you. What would you do with it? And people would tell me, well, I'd probably call my largest shareholders. Okay, that makes sense. what do you do with like your 1,000th shareholder or your 100,000th shareholder? And this is where it got very interesting. Companies would tell us, well, maybe I'd send them something, maybe an email or something in paper. And then I would challenge them, okay, what about like your 1,000,000th shareholder? And the answer would be, I might not do anything there. And that was sort of a light bulb moment for me and the product development team I work with, because it told us that in the absence of any other option, people were settling for essentially name and address or identification information that wasn't actionable. And what companies were telling us they wanted was, I want attribute information about a person that allow me to make a decision, a business decision. Is it worth it for me to do X to get Y? And we found when we stripped all the information away and just called it person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that was what people needed. So it was really interesting phenomena to realize our initial default is sometimes to give me Michelle Jackson's name and phone number, and at the end of the day, it's not really what people wanted. Long answer, but.
No, I think it's a very good answer, and I'm not actually sure if I can add much more to that, because I think that when we look at the data that we have and the sort of added value that we want to bring to the clients within the system, we are always asking those same questions about, what's actionable, what's worthwhile. You don't want to overwhelm people with pointless data and useless data. But you also start to realize, and Michelle, you made this point really well, which is you can collect lots of bits of data, and actually once you start putting them next to each other and building a picture, you start to get into some quite sort of scary territory in terms of the kind of knowledge that you have about these people or your sort of target audience, and you do have to sort of have a certain element of responsibility. I'm not convinced, having spent lots of time with lawyers around this issue, I'm not sure if the law is sort of fully caught up with some of the implications of putting lots of different bits of data together in terms of the picture that you can build up, the profiles you can build up, not just at a corporate level, but more importantly at an individual level. So there is definitely you definitely have to take that into consideration. But I very much echo the issue of the gut reaction is always to sort of have more and more and more, but actually the clever money goes for what's actually going to make my change my day or sort of make my life better.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I mentioned that I'm going to ask David just a question or input on terms of initiating a project that can be described generally as big data, but whatever it is in terms of what are there tips, ideas, best practices that you have that you've seen in terms of starting a project? And what I'm thinking of is who is involved, how do you keep it manageable, how do you not have it grow into a much bigger beast, how do you contain it, how do you track it along the way to make sure that the initial objectives are going to be met. And two things that I'm going to sidetrack on. One is, again, you guys out there, I am welcoming and recommending and asking that if you do have questions on bouncing around on what general big data questions you might have, please just raise your hand and wave it. And then also, David, if you want to make a point on any privacy issues, points that you want to make from your perspective.
I'll take the last one first.
Okay.
So, privacy is a big deal for us, obviously. At NASDAQ, we process tens of millions of transactions every day. We pass messages across markets, so it's a very big deal. In the investor relations space, we have had similar conversations to my colleagues about the aggregation of data. And so we've come to sort of a conclusion, sort of as Michelle was saying, how do we find the right things to bring together? So, for example, we have many. We were working with a client that was one of those industries that sort of bordered on two different levels, and they were really struggling at figuring out who their right shareholders are, or the right contacts, I should say, are. And we were able to help them get through it by, anonymously leveraging whom other companies in that space might talk to, but we did it from a big enough data set that we were able to make sure we kept the privacy of the data as private as possible. So that is a very big area, and the governance around that is a very big topic for us internally as we think about the products that we're building. You asked about how to start a project. Let me just ask, do you mean from our point of view or from?
I'm talking about from the issuer, from the
issuer point of
company
view.
side. I mean, again, it's this idea of big data. It's big. I mean, what does it really mean?
Right.
And then once we kind of come up with an idea of what we might want to find out, what the objectives are, I'm just thinking of, well, who's involved?
Right.
It's probably more than just the investor relations officer. How do you keep it manageable, and how do you help a company stay on track?
So I'm going to answer it by combining the experience of a number of clients that I've worked with, if that's okay. So, often, as you guys know, you have investor relations departments with one person. Sometimes there's an analyst. Sometimes there's 3 people. Often when we work with companies that are really going down the data analysis path, it's usually at least 2 or more people there. And usually we work with the analyst. And the first thing that usually happens is they come to us, and I often get those calls because of what I do, and they say, we want to look at A, B, C, and D, and we want all this data, right? And my job is to say, well, what do you actually, sort of to what Michelle was getting at, what do you actually want to do with it? And as you talk through, so the first step is to talk through the requirements and really think about what are you getting at? What is the question that came to you from the CEO, the CFO, the COO that actually you're trying to address? Mm-hmm. And inevitably, after talking that through, we've reduced the data sets from 10 to 3, and the objectives is not A, B, and C, and D anymore, but it's A. So it gets back to what I said initially. There's lots of content, but it's what you do with it, and thinking through that initially, like what is it? Like Michelle said, at the end of the day, it was just I needed to know person 1, person 2, person 3. It's having that conversation in which you identify, and I find it most effective to actually focus on what were they asked, right? What did your colleague, your executive ask you to do, right? And then we'll tap sort of what other clients have done, to be honest, or what we know to be effective, and help them sort of narrow that scope down so they actually focus on the thing that's effective, right? I mean, that's really the thing with big data. It's big, but it's really what you do with it. And if you don't start out with that clearly up front, you can load all the content in the world into whatever you're using, but you're not going to get results. So I think it's that upfront question that has to be answered, at least as a straw man.
So I'll kind of from there go to pitfalls, best practices. Again, do I have no? Awesome, terrific.
I have a
Mary.
question. Just from the nature of the services, I'm assuming that it's mostly larger issuers who are really the market at the moment. But are there examples from the micro cap,
Yeah.
and how does that work? How is
Thank
that
you.
scalable
Yeah.
for the little company with no
Yeah,
resources?
absolutely.
So the question I just answered was about someone on our side who probably has.
So the question was, who can use this? Can it go down to small cap, micro cap type of issuer?
So a lot of these questions come to us from. Well, we have an advisory services business, so we get that generally skews to more than 400 million, 200 million in market cap. But we have many clients who don't have that service, but those questions still come to us through people who are using our platforms, right? So we still answer them, and we will always talk to them about how to start these kind of things. And one of our challenges is we have to service Microsoft as much as we have to service a biotech company and a REIT, right?
Mm-hmm.
And foreign companies and dual listed securities. So our tools that use data are built to cover all those things. So as in a pitfall, the pitfall to answer that part of the question is trying to start off with too much up front, right? And I think exploring with little bits and moving forward is a much more efficient way of doing it. And to be honest, just Googling the question, right? There's a lot of stuff's been done already. And, you mentioned at the beginning that I write the leadership pieces. I mean, Google's the best tool just to see who's done what on that, right? It's not a clean slate anymore. You can actually find a lot of things that will get you a good part of the way to where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
If, don't look at it in isolation. Don't bite off more than you can chew.
Right.
And don't always trust the data. Like my colleagues will know this. There's an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago about how in big data, the biggest job now is janitorial, right? Like my wife teases me that I'm a garbage man because the first part of a project is cleaning up bad data. Like the project we're doing with Microsoft, there were 7 companies in the database that had $400 trillion market caps, which is impossible, right? But if you don't, that's extreme, but there are many others that go down the tail. So don't trust your data before you give it to your CEO. You got to, that has to be checked when you start a project, because you'll be in a world of pain.
Terrific. Randall?
So maybe say a few words about data visualization in the context of the effort to move data to information to sort of actionable knowledge, things like that. I'd just be curious your perspectives on sort of how much of this terrain is really how much of the value of this terrain is really being driven by that portion of the bell curve.
It's huge. For our platform, we've hired 20 designers to help with that. And I was on a call this morning for an hour going over exactly that. And I think, you guys are familiar with this. So many people have written about this. So many products get built in our world that fail, right? And then our management will say it failed because it was bad. But actually the design failed, right? It's actually that important. So I can't underestimate how important design is to exactly that. And less is more, right? So
yeah, I'll chime in and pass over to Rupert because I think you see this all the time. It's in bringing data products to market, I think visualization plays an important point in terms of sort of the democratization of data. So it's one thing to turn to someone else who looks at data all day and to immediately be able to understand what we're seeing on a scatter plot. But for most people, that's not the first thing they go to. And as much as I have a personal bias against pie charts, I really have an issue with pie charts. Honestly, most everyone I work with loves them. Because there's a comfort level with it, but you can see human behavior and sort of user experience. I think it's really important, and I'll also put a little plug in that I think for data exploration, and this ties back to your question about where to start. So I have sort of this dual experience. I'm inside an organization that started several years ago, shifting from being one of the world's most powerful processing organizations to an organization where we also draw data insights, and that's a huge pivot. Your infrastructure and the knowledge base and everything around that changes when you're looking at using data to mine it and analyze it. So I think visualization is an important way to get the business engaged in the data, because most of your business people are not going to be data scientists, and some of them may not even be subject matter experts. And so on that point, I would say data projects can start like a giant Excel hack. The very basis of some of our products are often whatever we can mock up or hack up with a little bit of code and like Excel and Tableau or whatever tools we have. We sort of think like, what could two of us do in a garage, right? And that's how we sort of challenge our own market share inside what is a big organization. And I'm a huge proponent not only of my own experience at the companies I've worked at, but watching other people successfully navigate data initiatives. Pick your spot. Choose the one spot that's going to yield a positive response, because the bigger your data initiatives get, and this is my anecdotal experience, you guys can keep me honest, the bigger they get, the longer the return on effort. I wouldn't even go so far as to say ROI, because ROI on data initiatives is really hard to figure out. It's usually, you usually can't get there. But the bigger the data initiative, the longer it takes for you to start realizing the return on the effort. And if you can pick one small spot that you can point to in your organization and say, we did X, we got Y, then people get excited and you pick the next spot. And it's often that combination of sort of these sort of startups or entrepreneurial efforts inside different parts of a big organization, combined with sort of a corporate some level of corporate sponsorship, and this happens at large caps and micro caps, then you start to build the momentum that says, okay, now it makes sense for us to move from sort of these small hacks to big processing power databases, ETLs, reporting engines, predictive capabilities like that.
And that's what I was saying too, just start small.
Terrific. So I've got a, Scott, hold your question, and back here.
I guess this is a question for the panel, but also for the IROs in the room. I mean, we're talking about, first of all, it's a great topic today, but I guess as we were talking it through, I started thinking about, we're thinking about it from the issuer perspective. I mean, how effectively are actively managed funds using big data? How much evidence are the IROs seeing it, and how far behind are we, right? If you think of we being corporates, from the resources and data that a large financial institution has.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, I'm not qualified to talk about how institutions are using big data. I think any more than anyone else in this room is, in the sense we've all read the reports and stories and know fund managers who use big data for running algorithms and trading strategies and so forth. But you know, I think the question is well, I think it's a, you know, I think IR departments historically have not really harnessed the power of data to help them with their jobs, and I think it feels to me a little bit like, you know, marketing 10 years ago, where they started getting into it, and actually, you know, over the last 10 years or so, it's become a sort of cornerstone of their profession, and I don't think it's quite there in terms of how people view within the IR industry, you know, how they should be running their role. So I think there's a long way to go in this particular industry, and you can see in it's of adjacent professions within the company that actually a number of others are already way ahead, whether it's HR, whether it's marketing in particular. Corporate comms is also quite far behind as well. You know, they still, all they care about is whether they get the CEO's sort of headshot in the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. You know, investor relations is still very much focused on, you know, are we meeting Fidelity and, you know, X, Y, and Z, rather than actually, you know, looking at it from the sort of numbers side. That would be my question. I don't know.
Scott?
Well, I was, thank you. I was just curious regarding Mary's comment on scalability, or in this sense, reverse scalability for small organizations to really leverage some of that. I wanted to hear some additional discussion around that. Maybe.
Can I just make a comment on the good thing about big data? I mean, it kind of depends how you do it, right? But there's a big cost to big data, but it's a fixed cost. So, you know, in order to sort of gather data and warehouse it and get it all processed and so forth, that's a fixed cost. But then there's almost zero marginal cost to sort of getting the information out and presenting it in the right way. So depending on how you do it, so if you are a massive company and well, let's say your Target or Walmart, you know, you're going to have a massive investment plan to sort of get some big data strategy in place, and it'll cost you millions of dollars to do that. But then thereafter, I mean, it'll cost you a certain amount to run it, but to get that additional information out, then it's just about tweaking and turning knobs. So it can't. I think big data is very much, you know, in this day and age where people, you know, everything is sold as software as a service and cloud-based technologies, actually big data is now very much accessible to any company, no matter how big or small. And so very much in our business, for example, we sell our big data services to, you know, $300-400 billion companies as well as $10 million companies, because we've made that investment ourselves, and then, you know, switching people on, marginal cost is close to zero, and it's just about the value of that service to those individuals.
I mean, the other thing I would add too is that there's lots of companies that make, you know, to go back to the small, MicroStrategy gives away its tool for free to a certain extent online, and there's other engines that are available. So in a way, it's, you know, you still need the content, but the tools are available. I mean, Excel has 1 million rows. I wouldn't underestimate it. That's a lot. When I started working, it was like 64,000. So, you know, a lot of the tools can be done by could be accessed by a single person. A lot of the content is available on the web, like pricing, fundamental data is sort of free. I mean, we spent the 90s putting that all in databases, but that's not where the value is anymore. The content is free, kind of, to a certain extent. Building a big, robust, to do the kind of stuff that Rupert was mentioning, yeah, there's a cost there. But for a small, one single person shop, there's plenty of tools out there that you can use for free, essentially.
Yeah, and I think if you're thinking about companies in the U.S., if you're not thinking about the whole span of micro to mega, then you're missing the boat. I mean, 80% of the market is going to be small and mid cap companies. Just if you look at the distribution of the size of companies in the U.S., and so solutions have to scale to meet that need. And from the companies that we work with, I can tell you it's the example I gave earlier was a company that had several million retail shareholders. That's just as painful a process for a micro cap that's got 50,000 retail shareholders. It's just a matter of scale for them, right? It's still the same problem. And to that point, I mean, there are some interesting differences when we think specifically about shareholders, kind of coming back to the core of investor relations. We've spent a lot of time benchmarking shareholder behavior in the U.S. And actually, I'll give a little plug for it. We just published another proxy pulse report yesterday. But microcaps are sort of a strange beast in the U.S. And if we look at things like how institutional and retail ownership is distributed across companies, by market cap, microcaps are very different, and they often haven't reached the same level of maturity to attract institutional funding, so they're often dealing with larger retail shareholder bases. They're dealing with the complexities of being closely held. I mean, there's some really unusual challenges in the microcap community that need solutions that may not be the same issue. I mean, it's a much smaller pool of companies like a Google that says, hey, 3 people own my stock and we're a giant company. That's not the norm. If you sort of charted everybody out, you'd see this huge group of microcaps that do have a very specific need.
Any kind of closing comments, Rupert, on that? How are we doing? I think it's about 1:10. Are there more questions?
Can I add something?
Oh, absolutely. And I've got a question right here. Yeah.
So I just want to go back to what Rupert was saying about qualifying investors, and we have the same problem with our tools, and one of the ways that we've done it is the problem of corporate access wanting to take customers or taking public companies to their customers is a big one, and sort of just like Michelle said, we had to build tools that worked across the market cap spectrum. Most don't fall in the large cap range. Most companies are in the 100 to even smaller range. So we use data to sort of find the signals in our targeting tools that can get customers or our clients in front of the right investors, and investors who like the space or like the fundamentals of the company. So we approach it through public ownership and public fundamental data, but it's getting at that same problem of how do you maximize your efficiency and not see only Goldman Sachs' clients.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I think for our company, one of the biggest issues we've had is because of big data, there are tons of third-party analytics companies that have been popping up and reporting metrics that are grossly inaccurate about our business. And it's really hard to find that information right until an investor brings it up or highlights it, or you see it in a short interest report, which is the worst. So what are you guys doing with your tools to help manage that process? And what have you seen other companies deal with it, and how do they try and grasp all that information to manage their IR function?
Well, there's a lot of stuff in your question. So, I mean, we publish we have First Call as our source, and we focus people on that to the best we can. But I think the problem you're mentioning of other data providers is just a fact, to be honest. And I think it gets back to messaging, and what we often advise clients is to stay on message. You're not going to be able to squash or to. I mean, the world of shorts is very aggressive. The rumors that are spread by shorts are extremely aggressive, if not bordering on really bad stuff. And the SEC doesn't seem to have taken a deep look at that. And so in the interim, it's to stay on message and not run after those things with hair on fire, because that validates them, in our opinion. So, we try to just advise clients as much as possible to stay on focus, and we make sure we have a very close relationship with Thomson Reuters, and they have very strict standards in their data collection and governance that we are party to.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is that they all have to have databases, and all those databases need to have standards and specific buckets, and whether you account for sort of one-off items or not, and depending on where you're on the line item, whether you call everything revenue or sales or interest income or whatever it is. So, and it's impossible to have a single sort of source of information, a single database for to account for the way that every different company reports. And so, that's what that great sort of XBRL program that's been, Microsoft, I know, is quite sort of involved in that. For how long has it been going for now? 15 years? 20 years? The XBRL sort of,
that long.
I mean, it took about 10, 15 years to get to where it is today, and to my knowledge, it hasn't been as useful or as widely sort of taken up, primarily for this issue that it's just impossible to get the sort of the level of standardization that would actually make it useful to be able to compare things across companies and so forth. In terms of the websites and the online disclosure that we do on behalf of our clients, we basically our premise is that it's within your own digital real estate. It's your space. You should be reporting your own numbers. You should be doing it exactly how you want to present it. You should not be using third-party databases and relying on them. They may not be inaccurate, but they won't be, 9 times out of 10, won't be presenting information necessarily in the way that you and your management want it presented. But it's an intractable problem which 15 years of XBRL committees still have not resolved, so I don't think anyone else is going to be able to.
And vendors are all those database vendors are going to look for their edge, right? So they're going to have their analytics on it. Like Trefis is one well-known one. People are going to look to find ways to do it, so there's always going to be that edge or that difference, right? So stick to what you're doing and make sure.
Right.
Do you have Michelle?
I think we're kind of wrapping up. These guys, you'll stay around for a little bit.
Of course.
We appreciate you coming out. Jeff, come on up and we'll kind of close it. One of my kind of closing comments is I think that it was really useful coming from a microcap stock. One of the things that we always talk about in the NASDAQ or from the NIRI front is how do we keep delivering interesting, topical information to different people who are interested in coming to our meetings. So having this, your comments kind of reflect on, it's not all just about mega cap company. It does go down to, it can have this, what we call it, the reverse scalability in terms of there's a lot of information out there that smaller companies can work from and have benefits. So Jeff, I'll turn it back to you.
Brad, thank you very much. Analyst meeting. Please finish your desserts, have coffee, and we're not in any rush, and hopefully our panelists will get something to eat. So thank you.
We'll get you some food, yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good to meet you. Yeah, thanks so much.
Raises more questions.
There may be some
There's rolls. My kids like to say,
It is best. I'll sit you guys up here. Okay.
This thing off.